Earlier this week, Xbox made headlines, but not in a good way. I decided to wait on covering this for several reasons, but mostly because I wanted to see all the discussions and responses about this situation. As you may know, 4 studios from the ZeniMax family have been closed. Those studios include Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, Alpha Dog Games, and Roundhouse Studios. Now, I know many of you may not understand why this happened. Not to worry, I'm going to break this down as plainly as I can. While some people decided to just jump into rage mode and begin shouting to the heavens and cursing Xbox, I was not one of these people. To be honest, I was not surprised at all by any of this, as I have seen firsthand what happens when a large corporation purchases a smaller one. More on that in just a bit. For now, let's just talk about the 4 studios. Starting with Arcane Austin, this team just produced a major flop of a game in Redfall. This game was released in horrible condition by a studio who had previously produced some really good games. Redfall released over a year ago and has not seen any significant updates outside of bug fixes. I feel sympathy for those who are now out of work, but the reality is they had their chance to turn things around and they didn't. Not everyone in the studio is going to be gone though. Some of the staff will be moved to other teams to work on other projects within Bethesda. My assumption is that the more talented staff members are the ones being kept on, but I don't have any inside knowledge, so this is just my thought. Next we have Alpha Dog Studios. This is the studio responsible for the Mighty Doom mobile game. I don't think I need to say any more on this because Mighty Doom is not exactly a major hit. At best, it has seen mild success, hence the reason the game is being sunset altogether. Up next is Roundhouse Studios. This one is not at all surprising since it was reportedly working on an unannounced game since 2019. And we still have no idea what that was. The silver lining here is that for the developers of this studio, they are at least not being fired. Rather, they are being folded into ZeniMax Online Studios to work on the Elder Scrolls Online and any other projects they may have. Closing this studio will really just be a trimming of the fat, so to speak. I expect that for the most part, it will just refocus and redistribute the developers and their leadership staff. Last, we have Tango Gameworks. This is the one that sent the masses over the edge. While they did produce a hit game in Hi-Fi Rush, it really was the only thing that they have produced over the last several years that had any real success. Don't get me wrong, I liked Ghostwire Tokyo, but it was not a major hit. Some people thought that because Hi-Fi Rush was well received and critically acclaimed, that it would be enough to keep the studio around. However, the success of that game was not as big as you might think. It had moderate success, but that was about it. For most, it was just a fun game to play once in a while. Now that we have gotten that out of the way, I think it is important to understand what happens during an acquisition. When Microsoft began looking at acquiring ZeniMax, they did a cost-benefit analysis. This is an extensive look at what ZeniMax has in its company holdings and how that can make Microsoft more valuable. Once the decision was made to go ahead with the acquisition, they then began a deep dive into the company's holdings by taking a hard look at each studio under the ZeniMax umbrella. A plan would then be developed as to what to keep and what to get rid of once the acquisition was completed. This is not something that would simply happen overnight. Rather, it takes years to complete those plans. It will very likely happen again a few years down the road with the holdings acquired from Activision. Remember when I said I have first-hand knowledge of how this works? Well, I saw firsthand when the cell phone company T-Mobile acquired Sprint. Like Microsoft, they too finalized the acquisition in 2020, and it was not until just last year that all Sprint operations have finally ceased. The point I'm making here is that the plan to shut these studios down was very likely decided at the highest levels of Microsoft prior to the acquisition being completed, and only now is being disseminated to the rest of the company. The truth is, for Tengo Gameworks, had Ghostwire Tokyo had better success, they likely would have not been on the chopping block. It might have been enough to remove them from the planned closures. Then again, it might not. Look, the evil within games is what brought them to the dance, but they have not been able to reproduce that success since. Even Hi-Fi Rush was not as successful. I get all the reasons for gamers being upset, but the reality is that our judgment is clouded by nostalgia and the fact that we can't see the inner workings of these companies. At the end of the day, Microsoft is in the business to make money. They are not a charity. The reason that Microsoft is worth $3 trillion is because they are able to make these hard decisions and not let the blind hope that one day this studio will make a big hit blind them. Sony is in this mindset, and it is also the reason why they are losing money hand over fist. These are the harsh realities of the gaming world. It sucks to see a studio close down, but at the end of the day, there are plenty of reasons why it has to happen. It is only going to get worse for developers because there is a large number of them who are simply not as good as they might think. Tim Cain has spoken about how the development process is being done in these larger studios. One of the biggest problems he faced was the fact that people, one, didn't want to take responsibility for their work, and two, they didn't want to be under a time constraint. Both of these are important if you are any good at your job and take pride in your work. Taking personal responsibility and being able to produce results within the time frame that is given are things that desperately need to be brought back into the industry as a whole. This is why games have been taking longer to produce, not because they're harder to make. It is also why games we get now, for the most part, are not as good as the games that were produced 25 or 30 years ago. They may be better from a graphic standpoint, but certainly not from a story or narrative standpoint. Ultimately, the studios that were closed from the ZeniMax umbrella were the right ones to be closed. We shall see which studios get closed from the Activision umbrella in a few years. At any rate, these things happen, and when they do, there is good reason, even if it is not disclosed to the public. Those are just my thoughts. What did you think of the closures? Did my analysis help you understand it better? Did you agree with my insight? Sound off in the comments below. While you're at it, like, subscribe, and share. And as always, I'm just glad you stopped by, and I'll see you in the next one.